Hi, everyone. Welcome back to People Do Want to Know podcast. I am really excited to share with you today's episode featuring Ami Kozak, musician, comedian, podcaster, content creator, artiste, you might say. This guy really does everything. And above all else, Ami is a Jewish leader that has stepped up in a big way for our community since October 7th. He has spoken up on countless platforms, on the news, defending our community in Israel, and I'm really proud to have the chance to meet him and do this episode together. Ami will tell you more about his work, but I will say that you 100% would recognize him from his JSketch account and especially for his Kamala Harris impression TikToks. They're all over my feed. They are so spot on and have recently gone very viral. With that said, Ami does many other impressions. He's super talented, and some of them you'll even get to hear on the episode. Ami has been working in various forms of entertainment for decades, and yet, if you go on his website, his bio is, in my opinion, completely understated from the numerous accomplishments he has. His About section is just jokes, music, thoughts. That's it. However, when you hear Ami speak, he is such a dynamic person, full of personality and thoughtfulness, and you will get to experience that. On a random note, I will mention that a couple of weeks ago, my brother told me that he would pay me $10 if I slipped in the word widowy on the podcast. Widowy is literally the word, literally, without pronouncing the R's. It's a stupid social media trend. If you look it up on TikTok, straight up write widowy into the search bar, you will see a ton of videos. But Daniel, looks like you got to cough up the money because I did manage to include it. I'm sorry Ami was a victim of it, but basically, look out for it in the episode. It's in there. We discuss a ton of things in this one. We talk about Ami's work, comedy, the Jewish community, and then we discuss politics. Ami breaks it down. He talks about where he stands on the current political climate, and I really agree with some of the things he says. Politics are never easy to talk about, and I really appreciated Ami's candor and just the opportunity to talk about the current political climate and even laugh through it. I don't even know where I stand, honestly. As I mentioned to Ami, Jews feel very isolated from either side of the bench right now. I'm definitely uncomfortable voting either way for very different reasons, I'd say. But I hope you enjoy hearing Ami's take. Maybe it'll resonate with you, or maybe you'll think about things differently. If I ever did repeat episodes, Ami is definitely a guest I'd want to bring back on because there's so much I can discuss with him. He has thoughtful opinions on so many different issues. It's just a real treat to speak with him, and please enjoy this episode. Hey, Ami, how are you doing? Welcome to People Do Want to Know podcast.
Happy to be here. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for doing this. I'm really excited to chat today. Without further ado, tell us about yourself. What do you do and how did you get there?
Long story short, I am a comedian, musician, composer, producer, singer, songwriter, content creator, podcaster, kind of all lanes firing at once these days. I started in a certain order, basically as a musician, playing bass guitar and singing since childhood, played in high school bands and college, went to the Berklee College of Music to study music for film and television, moved out to LA in 2011. I started a band there called Distant Cousins, and we had a lot of success making original indie folk pop music, releasing records. It was with two very prominent musicians from the Jewish music world, Dov Rosenblatt and David Swirsky. Dov Rosenblatt was in a band called Blue Fringe, David Swirsky of the Moshav Band. The three of us got together and made what you would call secular music, music outside of the Jewish world. We got a lot of songs placed in films and televisions, eventually not only released original music, started performing all over LA and around the country, and composed music for film and television as well, worked with DreamWorks Animation and Netflix. So my real career early on that kept me pretty busy for the last better part of a decade or so was in the music business. And then around 2019, I started doing more online social media stuff to give sort of the comedy side of myself a voice and a platform. And that kind of went into COVID when a lot of things shut down, but I really doubled down on putting out a lot of comedic content, impressions, sketches, content, where I was able to build up a nice organic following using TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, doing impressions of various people, Gary Vee, Jordan Peterson, and the like, and was able to really build up an interesting comedy community. And then once things started opening up post-pandemic, I hit up the stand-up scene in LA, and then around that time moved back to New York and dove headfirst into the stand-up scene in New York and started doing more stand-up comedy. and started my podcast, Ami's House, which was more of an extension of sort of my ideas and things that I was into, in addition to comedy and music. It sort of covered everything. And then post October 7th, I began speaking out about all things Israel and the Jewish community, given everything that we had seen in a world that felt morally backwards and flipped on its head. I just kind of made a little room to voice some thoughts of moral clarity to straighten some things out where I felt like there was a big void. And that opened up a whole other world in which I started doing a little more commentary and giving takes on things revolving mainly around Israel and the Jewish community. I ended up having some prominent debates with some prominent media figures, made my way around some of the podcast and news media circuits. So I continue to do all those things till this day. My band is coming out with an album tomorrow, actually, of our first English-Hebrew hybrid album called Out of the Darkness, where we actually dove back into our identity as Jews and did some hybrid English-Hebrew music. So we're excited about that, doing more stand-up, doing more content, doing more podcasts, and yeah, just chugging away. That's the whole story.
You're busy, man. What can I say? As soon as you said, I continue to do something, you mentioned just a minute ago, you're like, I continue doing. The first thing that popped into my head was, we continue to do what we said we have been doing. Your Kamala impression is absolutely iconic.
Yeah, that one's taken off recently. I mean, sometimes the tides, in the universe aligns when you get the right impression at the right time. So we are going to do what we have been doing. And that time is every day. And that's what we're going to do. Because that's what we've been doing. So, yeah.
Literally. Widowy.
Yeah. That's what we're going to do. So, thankfully, yeah, sometimes with the online world and the viral content world, things align. So, it's happened a few times where I hit my targets.
Between all the different crafts that you do, is it fair to call it a craft?
Sure.
An artistry?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is most fulfilling for you?
That's like asking to choose between my children, I mean,
They're
they
too
all
different.
they just all fulfill different things, and music I'm the most experienced in. So the pain to pleasure threshold is much more pleasure to pain, because at this point in the game, I've been doing it so long that there's not a lot of, I would say, torture or resistance with it. When I play on stage music wise, I don't have to think so much. But, in the newer endeavors, I would say like stand up is a whole different beast to get up and do stand up comedy, which is a very difficult format and very difficult craft. So there's a higher pain to pleasure ratio because it's just newer. You're trying to figure it out. You're trying to get over the imposter syndrome, and you're trying to just really work out what your comedic identity is on stage, which you have to build. And I started that a few years ago. And I think Seinfeld once said, like, whatever your years are in comedy, like that's your age in comedy. So if I'm like 20 to 25 years old in music, I'm like 3 or 4 years old in comedy, which just means you're kind of figuring things out and doing it. And I have an advantage coming from the music world because I've been on stage and I've been performing for years. And so there's some cross, pollination there of helping the other. But that's a whole other beast, and you're on stage by yourself. And so there's been all these different novelty things going on there. I enjoy podcasting a lot. You get better at that with time in terms of talking and stuff. And that's a fun, loose environment. So they all fulfill different things. Podcasting is the closest to feeling just like being myself and not having to perform. So that's nice. And music is a whole different transcended experience where you get to be the audience as well. You're sitting inside something that's happening. And with comedy, yeah, that's a really fun challenge. And it's a different kind of drug, They're all different drugs. So I don't know if I have a drug of choice. I'm just kind of addicted to all of it, which, is fun.
Comedy is a thankless job, okay? You can work on a joke for weeks and then nobody laughs at it because they're assholes. And it's just the worst feeling in the world. So kudos
it's very
to you.
audience dependent as opposed to other formats, Comedy depends on the laugh to complete the bit. Otherwise, it really does feel rejected. So that's a different thing that you have to contend with. It's the torture that comes with, every art form has its own torture accompaniment.
It's interesting. So I grew up in Ukraine and I consumed a lot of Ukrainian and Russian comedy growing up. I actually know Ukrainian and Russian comedians far better than American comedians, I'd say. And personally, I think a lot of them are funnier because there's a musical component in a lot of what they do. They often take songs that we know and they rewrite the lyrics to offer political commentary or some kind of opinion on what's going on in the world, or they make a lot of satirical pieces. And I'm sure there are comedians that do that. The only popular one I can think of is really Kat Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of brought that to mainstream. I am hopeful that maybe people like you and others will bring more musical, what word am I looking for? A musical element
Dimension
to comedy. Yeah.
I think, you have guys like Bo Burnham, Dimitri Martin, Reggie Watts. I'm trying to think of other people who do songs.
Bo is actually
Robinson.
A great call out, but unfortunately Bo is a fantastic call, but he disappeared.
Yeah. I mean,
his movie was incredible.
Yeah, totally. So he takes long breaks, but there's a space for that for sure. And I think there's a friend of mine, Morgan Jay, who's been doing musical comedy. I don't know if you've seen some of his stuff online, but he's big on TikTok and Instagram. I think there's a space now to do whatever you want in the world of social media, wherever you can find an audience. So there's less rules and gatekeepers and parameters for entertainment. There's a blending of sorts. And you're seeing comedians who bring out, you're seeing live podcasting. Kill Tony's got a full band behind him. You're seeing Andrew Schultz bring out 50 Cent to get the crowd hyped. And then you're seeing people do comedy within the acts themselves. So I think things are kind of wide open, and it's a little bit of an exciting Wild West of artists and creators to formulate their own show in the way they want it, So it's a good time for things to be, mix it up a bit.
I'm going to have to look into that. This reminded me, I said I would never talk about this publicly because it might ruin it for everyone. But did you know that you can bribe the bouncers at Comedy Cellar to get into a show that's been sold out?
I guess you can bribe just about anybody. I mean, if you smear someone the right way, I don't know. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me.
I was reminded because you mentioned Andrew Schultz, and he had 2 small shows at the Cellar, I would say like maybe 6 months ago or something like that. And of course, they were all booked up and the wait list was out the door, and I bribed the guy $40 and we got in.
Yeah.
Suddenly, magically.
It's a lesson learned for generations. That's always been the case. With enough money, you can kind of get what you need.
With $40, folks. $40
for
2 people.
That's interesting. But, okay. Yeah, that's the world.
I was trying to think, is that a lot or a little for that person?
Depends on the circumstance, I guess.
Yeah. And regarding now, with everything going on with Jewish people in Israel, when do you think you started to feel compelled to really speak up about the current war and come out as like a Jewish first content creator, Jewish first comedian, podcaster, everything?
I mean, October 8th was certainly a huge moment. I mean, before that, I was never, ever shy about it. And, you go through those phases where you kind of have a hierarchy of cool, like, your personal private stuff, the Jewish stuff. Yeah, it's fine, but it happens to be Jewish is like what you want to lean into. This sort of, if you find out I'm Orthodox and I'm Jewish, like, cool, no problem, not a secret, but it's not front and center. But I started doing Jewish sketches with this sketch group I started called J Sketch, where we actually tackle funny Jewish comedy and embracing that identity. But doing it in a serious way was certainly an October 7th paradigm shift for a lot of people. But for me to actually see a world that was either apathetic or celebratory of Jewish massacre, and this moment where a certain light was shed on how the Holocaust even occurred. It's like, it's so simple. I get it now. This is what you have to do. You just reframe the language and pollute the conversation and twist words and twist morality and call Jews this other thing. And under that, you can call them vermin in the 30s so that they're less than human, or you can call them Zionists today so that they're less than human. And then destroying them is a virtuous act, according to people, or something that you just kind of seems complicated or not easily condemnable, or for some reason, all this other forms of racism are so easy to spot and call out as evil. But with anti-Semitism, there was this, cloud that just seemed to wash over everybody of, I don't know if I can comment on it because it's a conflict or because it's complicated. I don't know much about the issue. And you're seeing people in the street cheering for the slaughter of Israelis, slaughter of Jews. Didn't seem like it would be something that's so difficult to condemn. Unfortunately, it was. So that just felt like, all right, we're in a dystopia here, a world I didn't recognize or didn't think was possible. And suddenly, even as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, you think you're past all that and you realize we're not. So that was the impetus to start speaking out, because you can make jokes all you want and make entertainment, but if you live in a world that doesn't respect you as a human being and respect your community, or can sit by and say, it's complicated, I don't really know, there's work to do.
Absolutely. And looking back at it now, almost a year in the making, we've had this war. You've had a lot of difficult conversations. You also interview a lot of interesting Jewish people on your podcast. What do you think has surprised you, or what have you learned?
What has surprised me? It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, the initial shock of people's inability to see this issue clearly, to be able to tell the good guys from the bad guys, broadly speaking. Not that everything is 100% one way or another. I guess everything is a matter of degree. But the moral subjectivism or confusion around seeing a prosperous, free country that protects individual rights, that, is sovereign and successful in the state of Israel. And I can understand people not understanding the history of a conflict or understanding the case for why Jews need their own state and the self-determining Zionist sort of underpinnings of why Jews need a secure, safe space to exist, given the history of anti-Semitism, the repeated cycle of anti-Semitism. There's a lot of history and a lot of academic discussion to be had in that regard. But just look at the Middle East with a bird's eye view and just look at what's going on and look at Israel and look at the people it's fighting and its enemies. And for you to need me to explain that to you or to feel confused by that, to me, is fairly shocking. And then when you see protests in the West of people on the pro-Israel side and the pro-Palestinian side, when you see the pro-Israel side holding up American flags, Israeli flags, and then you see the pro-Palestinian side burning flags, kicking down doors, ripping down posters of hostages. It's weird that it takes so much work to spell that out over who is on the right side here. Not only that, for them to use Jewish trauma against Israel and history of actual genocide against Jews to say, ha, 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 gotcha. But for the impartial person or the people I speak to even be confused on it is a bit surprising to me. When you see footage of October 7th, war and images of war are terrible, but everybody kind of knows that. It's only when Israel is the one being featured that somehow people forget what war looks like and forget what terrorism looks like and forget what people cheering when they're killing people and dragging them through the street and spitting on their naked body looks like. People seem to all of a sudden put these foggy glasses on and say, well, I don't know. And in a sense, they judge evil acts as virtuous or resistance, and they judge self-defense as aggression. I'm shocked by it in some ways, but, that is what it is. So having guests on who've come into their Judaism a little more, or I've been moved by that certain people who really maybe were Jewish in name only or just ancillary were now felt the need to lean into it. And I think it sheds light on different people who took for granted their Jewish identity or didn't really think about it and now are forced to think about it by those who hate you for it. So you have to decide which way you're going to go. Are you going to lean in? Or are you going to walk away? And it sheds a lot of light on sort of where we need to work as a community to build up a sense of pride and lean into our flaws and lean into our virtues and not be ashamed of it on either side.
You know what's surprising to me in all of this? So you don't know this, but the people that listen to the podcast know very well that I came to America as a Jewish refugee in light of the anti-Semitism in Ukraine at the time. And I'll mention to you that when I was moving, which was 2006, the anti-Semitism wasn't even that bad back then. Like compared to what it was during Soviet Union times, during World War II times, like more Ukrainians killed Jews than Germans killed Jews. So to me, the fact that there is so much anti-Semitism was always known. It's not that the anti-Semites weren't anti-Semites and they became. It's that in countries like America, it felt like anti-Semitism wasn't normalized. And so even if you were a closeted anti-Semite, to reveal that openly would make you a social pariah.
You're right.
So we didn't experience it because societally it wasn't normalized. And what surprised me most is that somewhere in all of this, over the course of a few years, slowly and slowly, anti-Semitism became normalized in our American society. And I don't know whose fault it is or how it happened or how to unravel, what we see today. But the most surprising thing to me is that the American society has permitted the slow normalization of anti-Semitism when we do so much work to prohibit racism and discrimination against other groups of people.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing because now with the conversation around Israel, the anti-Semite has been given a template in which to express it in a socially acceptable way. I'm not going to say I hate Jews. Maybe some of them do, but they'll say I hate Israel and I hate the Jewish state and only the Jewish state. That's the only place I have a problem with. That's the only place I have a problem with America giving money to. So it's just been given a nice outlet, a nice template to express some of that inner anti-Semitism if they possessed it. Also, in the political climate and the cultural climate, there's been sort of a backlash against wokeness, which I think is very fair and reasonable in the free speech movement. But then you find out when that goes too far is when you start to say that nothing is racist and nothing is anti-Semitic, and anybody calling out any sort of problematic language or speech is a cancel culture advocate. And so now I think for a lot of people on the far right, there's a confusion around any speech that's delicate or fragile or edgy or controversial. I'm just going to say it, and I'm just going to lean into it. And since the conversation around Israel post-October 7th, the conversation has focused a lot and spotlighted a lot on Israel, on the Jewish community, on anti-Semitism. And for a lot of confused free speech absolutists, they think that any effort to call out that rhetoric is somehow a cancel culture tactic or somehow a leftist tactic, when there's been conservative pro-Israel Jews for years calling out wokeness and going against cancel culture. And just because calling out racism and anti-Semitism where it doesn't exist, which has happened historically from groups on the left, is not productive and not helpful and wrong, that doesn't mean when we do see it, we don't call it out and we don't have a consistent principle about addressing it and calling it out. And we're not calling for mass arrests of people when we call out their behavior and their language. But that doesn't mean there's no social consequences for saying horrible, disgusting things. And I think a lot of these people are saying, leaning into this catch-22, where if you call out anti-Semitism, you're controlling speech, and therefore they double down on being more anti-Semitic. See, the Jews are controlling everything. So on the far right, there's been this ascendant, very disturbing trend of accusing Israel, the Jew among nations, as being the secret hand that's controlling U.S. foreign policy. And it's really the opposite. I mean, Israel is dependent a lot on the U.S.-Israel relationship for security. And if anything, America compromises a lot of what Israel can do agency-wise and is calling the shots on how far Israel can take things to secure itself. But either way, you see this talk about AIPAC and, there's a million. How many lobbyists exist in D.C. that are constantly lobbying for their causes? But AIPAC only is the one that's really devious and controlling things. It's not that, rather than congressmen and members of the House and Senate who support AIPAC because they're pro-Israel. It's not like AIPAC makes them pro-Israel. They support Israel, so they support AIPAC. Or they support gun rights, so they support the NRA. Or they're pro-choice, so they support Planned Parenthood. It's not like Planned Parenthood makes them. Now, I know that there's conversations to be had about money and politics, but besides all that, it's only AIPAC that gets this kind of disproportionate criticism, just like it's only Israel that gets this disproportionate criticism, and the Jewish community and Israeli pro-Israel community that gets held to this impossible standard. So the double standard across the board in all aspects of life. It's only the Jewish community that in some ways, as opposed to other marginalized groups, call it that anti-Semitism is tolerated in this weird way when packaged as anti-Zionism. So it's disturbing, and I think it's a consequence of a culture that has become so tribal and so wrapped up in identity politics that we don't judge people as individuals. We judge everybody as part of their group identity. And that when one Jewish person does a bad thing, it's the Jews or anything like that. When you think in terms of this tribalism in groups and confusing solidarity with community with blind tribalism, all this confusion around that has led to, and I think a lot of that's responsible of like the far left doing that. And then the far right is now playing that game in the form of white nationalism. But that's sort of how we end up here. And unfortunately, on the far right, the Jews ain't white to them, and on the far left, the Jews are white settler colonialists, and they're not marginalized. So the Jews are alone, and that's been the history.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you brought up politics, which I want to come back to because I had a couple of questions prepped for you there. I did want to mention something I was thinking about as you were saying it. America is the first and only country, in my opinion, where people view Jews as a religion, which is why they've created this clever distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. That distinction doesn't really exist elsewhere. If you go to Europe and you say you're a Jew, they view you as a distinct ethnic group. And my parents and my grandparents had Jew in their passport as their nationality. And I would hope that there's more education around the fact that we are a distinct ethnic group. And I used to teach Hebrew school when I lived in Philadelphia and I was a grad student. And I did a lesson about Israel. I was asked to do a lesson plan about Israel. And I played a game with the students. I've talked about this on the podcast before. It was an agree, disagree game where students stood in the part of the room if they agreed or disagreed or somewhere in between. And I had quite a few students, because Philly is a liberal city, that said, I don't believe that there should be any country in the world that's religion-based. So I don't think Israel is very important to me. And I don't think there should be, Christian or Muslim countries. The country should not be based on religion. And I said, well, did you know that Jews are a distinct ethnic group, like the French, like the Spanish, like the German? they're like, no, it's a religion. And I said, did you know that if you take a DNA test, your DNA will say you're Jewish? Christians or Muslim people would never have that on their DNA because that is a religion. It appeared that none of them knew that this was the case. And that to me seemed like a big problem. But I digress.
I mean, it's interesting because being Jewish is also multi-ethnic. So it's all of those things. The totality of a Jewish identity is there's a racial component, there's a religious component, a familial component, an ethnic component, a national component, the nationality, the national aspirations of Jews, the ancestral connection to Israel. But because we have been scattered throughout the world in a diaspora, where we trace our roots back to in Israel, and we've been scattered around the world. So we have scooped up all of these different qualities that make up a real complicated identity, but all part of a singular Jewish family, in the way that it's really a familial identity overall, which encompasses ethnicity and race and religion. And it's different than other groups which may solely be a religion or solely be a nationality. That's what's interesting about it. And I think a lot of people, depending on who you're asking, confuse it. Some people think it's just a race and therefore, don't understand that Israel is a multiracial society and it's not a white settler colonialist society. And some people think it's just a religion and like you're saying, and therefore try to divorce Israel and Zionist identity and ideology from Judaism, which is ridiculous. So depending on the detractor against Jews that you're asking, depending on the person who's suspicious of Jews, depending on where they're coming from and what their angle is and agenda is. If it's anti-Zionist, it's trying to say it's just a religion. If it's something else on the far right or whatever, it's trying to say it's just a race and they think they're better and blah, 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 so on and so forth. Everyone finds a way to hate the Jews in some way, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true, unfortunately. And going back to politics and the upcoming election, I think more than ever, Jews feel very isolated by both the Democratic and Republican parties alike. What do you hope to see for the future of the Jewish people as we have the election coming up?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking at it as objectively as I can, I may have my biases, but certainly the Democrats have much more so, I feel much more isolated from them. And the idea of a Zionist Democrat is much more of a rare breed than a Zionist Republican. At the RNC, you had hostage parents speaking, a call for the return of the hostages, a prayer for Israel and Israel's prosperity. And on the Democratic side, you see Kamala considering an embargo. I consider it, or this appeal to the genocide Joe folks to try to every support for Israel is couched in Israel's being responsible to make sure they have a ceasefire and not de-escalate. Everything is couched in trying to make sure they're also appealing and appeasing the haters of Israel, as if they're trying to win that side over. And that's just such a weakness to me, such a moral weakness to not be able to, see the moral difference between Israel and its enemies and who's really responsible for war and violence in the region. And that's really disappointing to me to see that spinelessness on the Democratic side. I don't see it, with the exception of a few people. Richie Torres, I just had on my podcast, been incredible. John Fetterman, of all people, unbelievable. Fetterman's been amazing. There's been a few here and there, and they're considered brave and going against the grain in their party and really standing out, which tells you about the party. If you saw Republicans doing that, you'd say, yeah, it makes sense. Now, that's just what it is. And Donald Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He did do it, while his other presidents had said they would do it, and they didn't. And you just see some moral clarity on the Republican side, especially with regard to Israel, and courage and standing on principle that it seems abandoned by the Democrats, who have been bullied or influenced, however you want to call it, from the moderates who are pro-Israel sort of on paper. They're leaning into the worst elements in their party and saying, we're with you, we hear you, yes. I'm like, no. Say, Rashida Tlaib throws up a sign, screw you. What's wrong with you? They don't say that. They won't call it out, unfortunately, enough. I'd be surprised if I saw, hostage parents speaking at the DNC. We'll see. Would love to be a time when everyone can just disagree maybe on policy and how to make things better and come at it from different ways and different strategy, but have the same basic principles and be pro-Israel and pro-American and pro-Western, as opposed to trying to, basically lean into the worst elements of the party or appeal to the worst fringes of the party. From the isolationists on the Republican side who don't understand the importance of deterring foreign adversaries, they live in a sort of naivete there, and calling that out on the Republican side, sure. And certainly on the Democratic side, it should not be a brave thing to stand up and defend Israel. It should be fully in line with democratic liberal principles and values. And they need to return to being pro-Western and pro-American and pro those things and be proud of the moral superiority of certain ideas. And they just don't seem to be. They seem to be trying to appeal, not even in an authentic way, just to try to think like that's the strategy, and that's disappointing to see us on the Democratic side.
I do think that's always true, though, because when Trump was running against Biden 4 years ago or whenever, he also appealed to the alt-right because he realized that that's his constituency and he would rather have those votes to win. So it's a tale as old as time with our two-party system where there is an incentive to appeal even to the radicals because those are votes you need to win.
Yeah, I would just say that, I guess pre-October 7th, it might be different now, but at the time, like, whoever we think Trump is appealing to, the worst elements on the far right are not ascendant in the culture, mainstream, on the way they are on the left. You don't see Nazis and KKK members with shows on Disney Plus or on mainstream media networks. You see them in the dark corners of the internet starting to build followings, and it's concerning, and we should call it out. But you don't see mainstream society leaning in and embracing those elements. The Tiki Torch people at Charlottesville were them, and they're not representative of, like, you don't see mainstream culture, corporate America, academia, the Democratic Party embracing those things. You see them embracing the worst ideas of the left, identity politics, all the stuff of like white women for Kamala, white men for Kamala, like basing what is this? Everybody, the common sense person is shunning that anti-Semitism on the far right and the woke worst stuff on the far left. But the cultural epicenters are leaning into those things still and doubling down as if race is paramount and the most important thing. White men for Kamala, white women for Kamala. This is stuff that the common sense person is past this. Like, why are we putting group identity and immutable characteristics of your race as this significant feature? Like, this is not the world we want to be in. We don't want to judge people based on race. That's what I thought we all agreed on. And they are doubling down on the worst elements of their sort of side, where I'm hoping that on the Republican side or the right of center, the effort should be to try to shun away from those things and not embrace those things. Now, I'm seeing that slip up too a little bit, but it's certainly not as representative and widespread, I think, in the culture as the worst ideas of the left, if I'm just calling a spade a spade.
I think that's a very interesting point. So ironically, when I interviewed the anti-Zionist, what he said is if you look at the FBI reporting on anti-Semitism in the U.S. year over year, the vast majority of hate crimes against Jews occur from the far right, and that the far right tries to put it on the left, but everybody really knows that all the hate crimes against Jews happen on the right. And so the reality of the situation is even hard to kind of pinpoint. I think you bring up a fantastic point about the fact that anti-Semitism and wokeness has been normalized in mainstream society in a way that being far right is shunned, and you're not able to do that in mainstream society. So that
look at our elite universities across the country. Are there Nazi protests going on that the university is saying, well, what's the context? Let's just see. We embrace all sorts of views here. If that ever happened on those campuses, those students would be kicked out immediately. And if a professor got up and said, Jews, this cabal, this inferior race usurping our government, we need to destroy the Jews, and said it that way and rallied up a bunch of neo-Nazis, they'd be all kicked out. They wouldn't tolerate it. But they certainly tolerate the left-wing anti-Semitism,
Yeah, I 100% agree.
So
I just thought it was interesting because he came with like stats prepared and was like, see, everything comes from the far right. And the ADL specifically overlooked incidents where there was anti-Semitism on the right so that it looked like proportionally there were more incidents of anti-Semitism on the left. And I was sitting there like that algebra lady meme, when she has all the numbers flying around and you're like, what?
Yeah. Look, I don't know. I'm not necessarily disputing that when you see hate crimes, where does hate crime against Jews as a target come from? Did this anti-Zionist talk about the Islamic anti-Semitism against Jews in Europe and stuff? Was he ready to jump on that board?
No, exactly.
He
Because
didn't.
that's inconvenient.
Correct.
Right?
I mean, in the Muslim world, unfortunately, the dirty little secret that Douglas Murray has spoken about with Mehdi Hassan said, even my closest enemy, Mehdi Hassan, has said the dirty little secret in the Arab Muslim world is anti-Semitism. I mean, will he speak about that and like the fact that entire countries around the world poll at hating Jews and having anti-Semitism in their culture and school systems. I mean, maybe he's going to overlook that. In the United States, it's like we're all about calling out anti-Semitism when it comes from the right. I'll call it out too. That could be very well that in terms of the FBI stats, where that violent actions come from is the right. But how does the culture as a whole feel about that? Does it try to justify it? Does it try to say, what's the context? No. But when it happens on the left, the entire apparatus in the culture makes apologies and excuses for it. That's the difference. As long as we can all agree that when it comes from the right, great, we'll shun it and condemn it. He's happy to do that. That's, evil actions can take place and be justified and people get away with it, not just because people commit those actions, but because the society and the culture as a whole permits them, makes apologies for them, makes excuses for them. And that's happening on the far left. There's no question.
Mic drop. All that is to say is I'm very excited to see the presidential debate between Trump and Kamala. I think it'll be very entertaining, as Trump will probably call out numerous times that nobody knows what she just said.
Well, she can't do it. She's a very low IQ person. Very low IQ person. That's the thing. She can't face the media. She doesn't talk about anything. She was the border czar. Now she's not the border czar. She was half Jamaican, half Indian. And I respect both. I respect both. But apparently she does. That's what he's going to. I think he should really highlight the fact that, how is everybody just cool with this now? Pretending like they didn't just usurp, saying, the dishonesty. Everybody knew Biden was in decline. It's very obvious. And then telling us this whole time he's perfect, he's incredible, and then just trying to. My impression is a lot of the enthusiasm around her and Waltz is completely manufactured by the media, and a lot of people are like, "What? What just happened?"
It's also irrelevant to their ability to do the job. The fact that Tim Waltz is a lovable guy and a cute little man. I'm from Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota, for crying out loud. Yeah. That doesn't mean he's going to be a good vice president and able to, affect change. Yeah,
I mean, I'm no political analyst, but I sense there's a honeymoon period where people are just so excited it's not Biden because they knew that was a total loss. And then all of a sudden that goes down and you're going to start to see wait a minute, she can't answer questions. Because she doesn't have ideas. She just dances around them. There's no real principle or ideas there. And you could just tell because they're just a bunch of canned responses. They asked her in that interview, I saw a clip where it said, "Who's your favorite rapper alive?" Tupac.
Yeah. Alive.
No, I mean, he's alive in me because I remember. Who else? And she goes, "Next question." Nothing's real there at all. Nothing is real there at all. So that's my take. I mean, that's just and I think a lot of people see that. It's not like a partisan position. I don't think there's much there. I don't say that as any sort of partisan. I say it as I haven't seen any impressive real ideas here or real principles that come from her. It sounds like field-tested, canned responses. Say this when you say this. She called Joe Biden a racist in the primary. Do we remember that tactic? She called him a racist. She said he supported busing or for taking away busing from my neighborhood. And that little girl was me. So, come on.
Your impressions are amazing. And it's laughter through the pain is what I can say. And as we wrap here, I was wondering, in this difficult time, no other way to put it, who has made you laugh?
Oh, interesting. I find comfort in all the classic comedians out there doing their thing. And, who has made me laugh in particular that's come up on the scene. I always blank on questions like these, and then they come to me afterwards. But I could plug several comedians that I just love, podcasters I like. I watch a lot of Kill Tony, Joe Rogan, Tim Dillon, Andrew Schultz. I'm trying to think of who else in that space. There's all that stuff that I kind of, just consume for fun in the stand-up world. But I think what I'll say is that as Jews, especially, it's a inherent fundamental Jewish value that laughter is medicine and creativity. That's how we respond to pain and trauma. And when we suffer, it's when we double down on our creativity. And the only way to get through the difficult parts of life is to be able to laugh at it. And so luckily we summon our Jewish comedic muscles to find the best. It's been an incredible thing in this outpouring of creativity that's happened post October 7th in being able to make audiences laugh and perform music for them and entertain in a very holy way to uplift the spirits of a community that's been hit pretty hard and downtrodden. And you're just seeing that all over. You're seeing all over Israel, all over the Jewish community here, a culture that celebrates life, that is elated and full of creativity and full of celebration. And that is what we have to be proud of, that even in the face of death, in the face of darkness, there's light that we double down on creating and bringing laughter, light, music, fun. That's what we've seen. And we've seen it unite the entire community across the world in Israel and in the diaspora. And so that's the secret power, I think. That's our power. So there's been a lot to laugh at, a lot to cry at, and a lot to laugh at, because that's how we get through it.
Absolutely. And how can people connect with you on social media and learn more about your work?
So you can follow me on Instagram at AJ-Comedy. Ami Kozak Official is the official name. AJ-Comedy on Instagram, on TikTok, at Ami Kozak on Twitter, Ami Kozak Official, AJ-Comedy on YouTube. And my podcast is called Ami's House. My band is called Distant Cousins. We're releasing an album August 16th, inspired by the events of October 7th and the healing that was needed. It's a both Hebrew and English album. We're excited about that. And I think that basically covers it. So find me out there and keep listening and watching and laughing and dancing and thinking.
I can't wait to listen. And also, I got to mention, I don't know if you know this guy, but apparently there's a Jewish cowboy who sings country music that is steeped in the Torah, is what his description says. I saw him on TikTok. That's how I even learned he existed.
Shalom Aleichem, Malakei Shares. I like that.
Yeah. So
I'll check him out.
You didn't lie when you said everyone's getting creative in this time of sadness and doom. Yeah. What can I say? Okay. And last question for you. It's one that I ask every single guest of the podcast. Who would you like to nominate for People Jew Want to Know?
Oh, for the next episode or something?
Hell yeah.
Who do I nominate for People Jew Want to Know? Douglas Murray, honorary Jew. Try to get him. He's almost there. He's almost there.
Yeah, that's an iconic nomination. Thank you so much.
The Philo-Semites out there.
We had Shai Davidai nominated Daniel Ryan Spalding. That's another example of a great ally for the Jewish people.
Sure.
Anyway, thanks for doing this. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People Jew Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People Jew Want to Know.